All right, so let's move on to the definition of, or the distinction, making a distinction between workforce housing versus affordable housing
Mhm.
versus Section 8 housing. So explain to me the difference between these.
So let me define the first two first, and then I'll tag in Section 8 at the end of that, just because I think it's good to have the two reference points to be able to define Section 8. So affordable housing, in the way that I consider it, and I think in the industry standard, would be any housing that serves families that are at or below 60% of median income, right? So think 0 to 60% is what I call, and this is my own definition of true affordable housing, right? Where families, their incomes and the rents associated with those families that have those incomes are affordable at or below 60%, right? And almost every government program out there basically serves that space generally. And there's a little bit of, bleeding over 60% here and there, but just for this conversation, we'll say 60%, right? And then workforce housing, you could argue, really is between then 61% and some upper figure. In some marketplaces like New York, they may use 120 or 150 or 180% of median income, right? In New York, they have moderate that fits in those, 150 and 180% figures. But I think definitionally this 80 to 120 would be considered to be the moderate income space classically, right? Now, Section 8 fits into both those conversations, and that's why I answered the way I did. Section 8 provides a voucher to a family that, like most housing authorities issue vouchers. They have waiting lists of families that need help with housing through this government. It's really a HUD program that's allocated vouchers through the local housing authority in whatever market that the project is or where the tenant wants to live, right? So, on our Fullerton project, it would be Orange County Housing Authority would be the person who issues the voucher, right? They can go into any unit at all that accepts a voucher. That's really the key. In fact, California just passed a law that says that landlords can not now bar Section 8 tenants because of their Section 8 voucher alone. In other words, there's other criteria that landlords need to underwrite and can underwrite, credit history, rental history, that kind of thing. But that California state law as of January 1st, 2020 says no landlord can exclude a Section 8 tenant because of Section 8 voucher or the fact that they have that.
So how do they work actually, a Section 8 voucher?
So basically the way it works, just high level is, the voucher is issued by the housing authority to the family. And then the family will go find a housing unit that will accept the voucher and that the rent is generally coherent with the standards that the housing authority considers to be appropriate. And there's some published figures,
Okay.
something called the fair market rent, or FMR for short, which basically says this is what HUD and the local housing authority consider to be the fair market rent relative to what they would pay for a unit that has a voucher, right? That the tenant moves in and that's the rent that pays. So like as an example, I'm gonna probably not get the numbers exactly correct, but I think one of the markets that we're in, the FMR for a 5-bedroom unit, and these rents, these FMRs are based on housing size. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bedrooms. Our units are 5-bedroom, 4-bath. And so that rent for that Section 8 FMR is $3,221. That's $3,221 a month, right? That when that voucher comes into that unit, that's in essence what the landlord can expect to receive as income from the voucher, right? Now there's some adjustments and the housing authorities do need to look at market comparables, but it's based on, published FMRs, market comparables. And then most importantly, the tenant only pays 30% of their income, whatever that is. If their income is 0, then they pay 30% of 0, right? If they make, 10,000 a year, then it's 30%, right, of 10,000. And then the voucher makes up the difference, right? So say every year or every month, the tenant can pay $221 a month. That's 30% of their income. That's appropriate for what their income level is. Then the housing voucher will make up the difference, which is $3,000 a month. Now there's some other adjustments for utility allowances that are deducted from the rent, assuming that the tenant's paying, gas and electric and those kind of things. So the rent is lowered to allow them to have money to pay that. And then it lowers the voucher rent as well.
Is there any kind of workforce housing tax credits?
There is not. There was at one point one senator put forth the idea of a moderate income tax credit that never ended up going anywhere. And in fact, when that idea came out, we were exceptionally excited about it. So at this point, there is nothing active that could be in the future. I think if this divergence of housing prices and stagnant incomes continues to widen, then I think that you will have that. Now, there is a proxy or a related capital vehicle, which we can talk about as needed, but the opportunity zone capital space to me sort of allows capital to flow into marketplaces and serve moderate income projects, right? I mean, they can serve any kind of project that's in a qualified census tract for the opportunity zone, but it's not a tax credit, but it is a tax incentivized investment vehicle. And I think it pairs well with moderate income housing.
And what about grants for low income housing development? And
definitely grants for low income. To my knowledge, I don't see anything for moderate. Every city and marketplace is different. So I just speak to, my knowledge base in, the Western US and California specifically. But there's nothing generally out there in the marketplace at this point of any size. I mean, there may
be no HUD grants or anything. And there's no similar programs for workforce housing development.
For pure workforce housing, there's not, right? And again, we need to be careful about workforce housing because some people will say what I call true affordable tax credit finance. Some people will describe that as workforce housing, and there is a capability to do income averaging on a tax credit project where you could actually have 80% rents, but then the other end of the spectrum, you have to lower rents down to 30, 20, 10% of median income, very, very low. Right? As long as you achieve a 60% or below average rent, then you qualify under the tax credit programs.
God, that's really technical stuff.
And so, but I will say this: I think that's generally not utilized as much. And I'm not we used to do tax credit housing. We don't do that actively. So some of my knowledge may be a little bit outdated, although the income averaging, that does exist. But I think if you look at a true affordable housing, almost all of the programs are set up, particularly in California, to give capital, to allocate capital to the lowest income families, right? Extremely low, deeply low income. Those are specific terms defined in the industry, because I think particularly in California, where we have a deep need for homeless housing and homeless housing with services or permanent supportive housing, those incomes need to be even more viewed. And so what you get is you'll have nonprofits and other people that are in that space that their goal is to give all the incomes across the entire project as low as possible. That requires government capital or subsidy, right? Which we've talked about is a finite source, never enough for that. But I think you see that the ethic of that space of true affordable housing really wants to drive rents as deeply down into low, very low, extremely low as possible.